It's time for your Heli Life giveaway secret word. Listen up and remember this word because you'll need it to enter for a chance to win exclusive Heli Life gear. Ready? This episode's secret word is procession. Visit contests.verticalhelicast.com to enter the secret word.
What's up, guys? It's Halsey Schider with the Helicopter Podcast, and I am so excited to be back in the podcasting seat. Excuse me, I got a little frog in my throat. It's a little early here on the West Coast. I'm just getting my cords going here, so I'm extra horsey this morning, but we're gonna make it work. Big shout out to MHM Publishing, the Vertical HeliCASTS platform, for making this podcast possible and other podcasts possible. If you haven't checked out Vertical HeliCASTS, you really need to. It's the Hangar Z, the Real Rescue, the Vertical MRO podcast, and many others, of course, including the Helicopter Podcast as well. And we just love doing what we do. And a big shout out to our listeners. We couldn't be doing this show without you. And I am just excited to talk about safety this morning. Chris Young, welcome to the Helicopter Podcast. As I look through your resume here off to my right, that's kind of the common denominator is safety. Most notably, of course, you're the director of TOPS, which is the Tour Operators Program of Safety. So, Chris, welcome to the podcast. How you doing, brother?
It's great to be here. Thank you so much. I enjoy the opportunity to hang out and talk safety. Most people don't, but I don't mind it at all.
You know, I think that safety is so important. And I think that sometimes there is like that stigma, right? Like when you hear about the safety guy, right? Or the guy that's real involved in safety, there is like a moment of like vest wearing, stop sign holding kind of look, right? And there's maybe a bit of this negative stigma. And I think that was probably more aggressive, back in the day. But I feel like our industry is really actually transitioning to a place where we finally, I hope, are putting safety as the number one priority. I've been flying helicopter. We were just talking about it, before the show. I went straight from high school to flight school, essentially 37 years old now. So I've been doing helicopter stuff for actually a long time. And in that time, I have a pretty large amount of friends that have perished in helicopters. I was just talking about that recently, actually, with this young guy that's getting into helicopters. I want to stress to him, like, hey, look, it's dangerous, right? So no matter what you do, helicopters are going to inherently always be a little bit risky, right? It's not your typical 9 to 5, and I think we accept that. But I'm guessing, from your perspective, there's probably a lot of things that we can do as pilots to really limit, mitigate, and help ensure safety. So I'm stoked that you're all about safety, and I think it's important. And I love that we can use this platform to talk about safety because it's always good to reinforce that. And look, I don't want any more people to die. It's not fun.
No,
Picking up the pieces of helicopters is not a good place to be. And so, yeah, it's important to talk about these things. But before we go too deep into safety, just give us the little skinny on your background, Chris.
Yeah, well, thank you. I began my career, out of aviation career, I should say, out of college. I was a Navy ROTC student, and upon graduation, I was fortunate to get selected to go to flight school. I grew up in the era of the movie Top Gun, and I think everybody had these big aspirations. Oh, I'm going to be the next Maverick or Iceman, and that didn't end up being my profession in aviation. I was a helicopter pilot, and I'm thankful for that too, And so, but yeah, I went into the Navy straight away out of college in flight school. I ended up flying in the Navy, the SH-60 Bravo Seahawk. It was a multi-mission platform, flying off the back of small ships, frigates, destroyers, cruisers, and sometimes the independent steaming, sometimes with a carrier group over to the Arabian Gulf. And it was exciting. A young individual with the responsibility of this awesome aircraft and doing some interesting missions. And I loved it. We flew 2 pilots and air crewmen, sometimes more. But the multi-mission part of it was pretty cool because, we were primarily an anti-submarine warfare platform, but we ended up doing search and rescue, logistics, you name it. They put us out there. And I think that helped kind of formulate some ideas for, my ultimate long-term career of where I wanted to be in the helicopter industry. And that's truly, where I was excited to be at. Again, people had dreams of Top Gun, but, unfortunately, I didn't have the grades for jets. So I got helicopters, and that was a good thing, right? And so, it's been very rewarding. And so I spent 20 years in the Navy, active duty and reserve. And so,
wow.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, wow, that's a long time. That's a career, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, in conjunction. So I think a lot of people know, especially in our community, when you're in the reserves, you're part-time, right? Part-time Navy for me, and but you also have a full-time job. And when I got off active duty, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I truly enjoyed the kind of the search and rescue element of what I did. I was an instructor as well when I came off of my sea duty, and I really enjoyed that as well. I was tossing around some ideas. My wife and I were trying to figure out what we wanted to do, post active duty and into the reserves. And I thought flying air medical would be awesome. And I was so fortunate to be hired. I flew at a program in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, STAT Medevac, and I loved that job. That was so fun. Every day was different. And as you touched on, at the beginning was what we do is in a helicopter world is very diverse and dynamic. And any given day was going to be different. And that was a lot of fun. Yeah. So I did that for a long time. And then an old Navy buddy gave me a call, and, we were just catching up. And he's like, well, I've got this job. And he worked at Sikorsky Aircraft. And so, Sikorsky built the Seahawk. And I was like, well, that's kind of like the factory is the mothership, right? Where all good things are built, helicopters. And so I got hired to work there. And, while I was in the Navy, I was our search and rescue officer. I was a NATOPS officer, and standards compliance and all, around, looking at safety, right? And then when I was at STAT Medevac, I was the base site safety coordinator, and again, all focused on helping with safety. And then at Sikorsky, I was hired into their aviation and product safety department, which solely was set up to enhance and improve safety within the Sikorsky fleet, whether that was on the design side or after production, helping our clients flying the aircraft with any safety-related issues. And so that's really, I kind of dug into aviation safety, and then safety management system started to gain traction and helped to start to develop that process there. And so that was a lot of fun. I worked with the S92. I was a product safety model team lead there, which essentially means I was helping to coordinate anything that was happening in the fleet related to the S92 safety. I would bring a team together, and we would work to resolve issues that customers identified, or when incidents occurred, helping to facilitate that investigation and corrective action. And so that was really, really interesting, for sure. SI-2 was such a great aircraft, and a lot of people depended on that, carrying passengers and so forth, especially in the oil and gas community. But within Sikorsky, I also kind of shifted roles and helped manage safety within the flight ops area, from production out to delivery of the aircraft, and then even out into our outlying facilities, going out and doing inspections and audits. So that's when I really got into auditing and validating compliance and things like that. And then my wife and family, we wanted to move to Colorado. Connecticut was wonderful there in Stratford, but we had family out in Colorado, and so I looked for opportunities out there, and primarily I was looking for aviation safety, and was hired with Argus Prism to help with their implementation of a kind of a helicopter-centric SMS software solution, and so I did that for a number of years, and I also worked at Baldwin Aviation in a similar role, and then worked with some technical documentations for airlines, and some consulting, and then I even worked in a healthcare, an oncology company to help with reliability and resilience, and safety focused as well. And then now I'm an aviation insurance broker and risk management consultant, and working with clients to help identify insurance solutions for their needs, and then, but also, one of the things that I do with my company Pik West is help facilitate safety management and risk management with our client base, and so heavily involved with many of our clients in talking about hazards and identifying hazards, and how do we mitigate those and so forth. And then over the years, I was involved in TOPS, Tour Operator Program of Safety, where some of the companies I worked with were sponsors of TOPS, and I got to know TOPS and be involved in their events, and then became a board member for many years, because I really believed what TOPS was trying to do. Elling Halverson had a vision back in the early 90s to how can we improve safety in the air tour industry, and TOPS was that vision that he had. And so in 1996, was when the first draft started, and 98 was really when TOPS kind of started. And it's been in place for many, many years, and we've had several members. We're about at 5 right now. We've got a new member coming on board, which we're excited about. And again, it's about how do we promote safety and raising the bar of safety in the air tour industry. And so I've been the executive director for, I think, about 4 or 5 years now, and I really enjoy that, and working with operators in the air tour industry.
Well, lots to unpack there. You've done a lot, and as I said at the top of the show, going through the resume, of course, safety being essentially the common denominator. And again, excited to dive deeper, but I do have to kind of start back. I am just always curious for our listeners who might be interested in kind of a similar path. So it's my understanding, like if you did the ROTC at Penn State, your Navy ROTC guy, did you do then like 2 forms of OCS, like one during your, say, sophomore to junior year, and then postgraduate OCS with the Officer Candidate School? Or is it go through your 4 years, go to OCS, commission, and then figure out what you're doing?
Well, so ROTC is a little bit different than Officer Candidate School OCS. They're separate pathways to become an officer in the Navy. And so with ROTC, I was in the program for 4 years, and you take military related classes throughout, during the semester. You do activities once a week and on the weekends related to the, just for me, the Navy, and Marine Corps is part of our ROTC unit as well. And so all 4 years I was, involved in learning about the Navy and Marine Corps and the military and the different aspects of those services there. And during the summers, we would go and do training as midshipmen, ROTC midshipmen. And each summer was a little different, right? And they tried to expose you to as much of the Navy and Marine Corps as they can to help you as an individual understand, well, what do I really want to do once I get commissioned into the Navy? And so for me was that 1 week that we got to spend with an aviation squadron was, sealed it for me. It's like, wow, this is really exciting. My father was in the Navy, but he was a ship driver, black shoe they call him, and surface warfare officer, and he had a very rewarding career. But I knew that I wanted to fly, and so I immediately focused on how do I, what do I do to improve that, and I just learned about aviation, and I didn't take any lessons. I wish I had, but it wasn't a requirement back then, and so I was fortunate and applied to go to flight school, and I got accepted. So the day I graduated was the same day I got commissioned as a naval officer.
Okay, so you go through and that all kind of counts towards it. Well, that's really neat. With the Seahawk, and we'll do this in layman's terms. We don't have to go too deep, but obviously a lot of people are familiar with, say, the Black Hawk, and you can look at the Seahawk and say, okay, it looks about the same, but there are some nuances. So what are some of, just like for the layman's again, for the high level kind of differences between, say, a Black Hawk and a Seahawk?
Thank you to our sponsor, Robinson Helicopter Company, the choice for unrivaled safety and reliability, so you can accomplish any mission with confidence. For more than half a century, Robinson has been at the forefront of the helicopter industry. From the R-22 to the R-66 turbine, Robinson makes helicopters accessible so more people can accomplish more missions. Climb higher. For additional information, visit www.robinsonheli.com.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the airframe is essentially the same airframe, right? The shell, so to speak, right? When they start building it, like at Sikorsky, they have separate production lines for the Black Hawk and Seahawk for the variances that do occur. And so on the Navy version, and now they're flying the Romeo, the Sierra, that has a lot of avionics and mission equipment that is on board. That of course the Army doesn't need or utilize. So whether you're out there trying to hunt submarines or find small boats, small ships to engage with, or to do search and rescue, or haul supplies between ships, that was the primary differences, was the avionics and mission equipment that's installed in the back. So you've seen a Black Hawk, that cabin area is massive, right? And a Seahawk, it's much more constrained because of that mission equipment and avionics that is on board to help carry out those other missions.
When you're looking for submarines, is it a thing where you like hover over the water and you have to drop some type of sonar or something into the water that's then looking for submarines?
Yeah, so two different methodologies to that, right? So the aircraft would carry, at my time in the 60 Bravo, we carried sonobuoys that we could, as we were flying in an area that we suspected a submarine might be, we would deploy or punch out, a sonobuoy that would float down to the water, and then you could passively listen or actively ping to try and identify the location of that submarine. At the other side of the Foxtrot at the time had some sonobuoys, but also had a dipping sonar, and so they would come into a hover and dip the sonar, which is a much more powerful pinging capability, and they would leapfrog different areas to ping and look for subs, where we would fly around, deploy the sonobuoys, and use those. And many, sometimes in conjunction with the Foxtrot, again, try to triangulate where the submarine might be. Now you guys
ever find any subs?
We trained and found them, and then we would look for them occasionally while in deployment, and have some success. Yeah,
that's cool. Yeah. I feel like that would be like real exciting, like you're fishing, and then all of a sudden, like, oh, Hey, we got one.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Crazy to think. Yeah. And that's one of the neat things about the military. And I talk about that on the show before, where it's a path that some can choose to go and do some really cool flying. Flying offshore and hunting submarines and landing on, ships and doing all that stuff. It sounds pretty cool. I'm guessing there's also kind of the other side of it where if you're on a ship for a long time or something like that, you might get a little homesick or things like that. But, overall, pretty rewarding and pretty cool flying that you're doing. And, especially when you're young and don't have anything else better to do, you might as well go hang out on a ship and fly, a multi-million-dollar aircraft and have the government train and teach you to do it, which is a huge plus. So it's
that was
a neat path.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. There's no doubt about it. I received phenomenal training, to learn how to fly. In the Navy, the pathway, when you start flight school, everyone flies fixed wing. At the time, it was a T-34. And we all got to fly that single engine turboprop, which was an amazing aircraft. And after you finish that initial phase, you branch off into kind of your specific area. And so I went and flew essentially Bell 206, learn how to fly helicopters. And that was a great platform. And they've moved on to newer platform. But it was really focused on, the mission and what we would do once we got to the fleet. And then after you finish flight school and you get winged and you select what airframe you're going to get, then you go and do more training in that specific airframe, in flight, and then also a lot of simulator training. And it was phenomenal. I was so blessed to have that opportunity and learn and then come back as an instructor and teach folks how to fly the 60 Bravo as well was really rewarding. It's hard to achieve that elsewhere, for sure.
One kind of consistent question that I'm always asking guys and gals that were in the military and then ended up going into the civilian route. I'm fortunate enough to be buddies with a lot of former helicopter drivers in the military. I don't think any Navy helicopter driver. You might be my first Navy helicopter driver friend. So I'm lucky and
I might
excited
be your new best friend
to have that. A lot of my guys, flew in the Army, flew the Black Hawk, the UH-60. Then they were in the Guard. Anyway, a lot of them then transitioned, similar to you, over to the civilian side. They killed it. They're awesome. They did a great job. Within my training class, we had a couple guys that were a little bit actually on the older side. I don't really kind of remember their full career, but a lot of just their flight time had only been, flying in the military, 2-pilot crew, and then transitioning into the air medical side, single pilot, new avionics, lots going on. It was a harder transition for them than I suspected. And I got to talking to my other military buddies about it, and they said, hey, look, it's just a lot different, right? The flying that we do in the military, or that I should say you guys do in the military, is significantly different. 2 pilots, just a different whole atmosphere. And so when you transitioned to the civilian side, was there a steep learning curve, or did it all come fairly natural for you?
Well, I would say it definitely was different in the sense, you're right. The military traditionally you got 2 pilots up front. And, when I went to go fly air medical, it was a single pilot IFR program, right? And so, fortunately, we did a lot of IFR training, flying in the Navy. And so I think that helped me a lot in that transition to go into a civilian program that was going to fly IFR single pilot. Fortunately, the aircraft I got put into, EC-135, was amazing, right? Its avionics and capability to fly IFR single pilot. It was like a video game for me. So that was a little bit of a shift, right? The 60 Bravo was a great platform, but I think we had the equivalent of a Commodore 64, running the mission systems on board. Maybe a little bit more the capability, but still, nothing like that EC-135, and so learning how to use those avionics, because we really didn't have as nice of avionics. Oh, however, I will say on the 60 Bravo, we did have the capability to auto fly that aircraft for search and rescue. So like when we would come into a hover to deploy our SAR swimmer, we would be hands off. The aircraft would be flying that down to a 10-foot hover or 10 knot airspeed, or a 15-foot hover with 0 airspeed. And so though that actually kind of helped me, because those were dials, right? And then, so when I got into the EC-135 and flying IFR, I was turning dials as well. So that definitely helped. So I was fortunate there. But I think that transitioning to a single pilot out of the Navy, I was nervous, right? I was like, okay, this is really all on me, and as an aircraft commander, of course, you're responsible for the aircraft and the crew and the mission, and so there's clearly responsibility there. But being the only pilot, and with two medical crew members, or sometimes more, depending on the type of medical mission being performed, that made me nervous. But like anything, experience brings confidence, and that helped tremendously. And I had good training, and when I showed up, they really spent time in the classroom, in the aircraft, to really help me get to that level of confidence and skill.
With STAT, who are you employed by? Who is operating that?
So at the time, it was CJ Systems Aviation back in the day, and so technically, I was an employee of CJ Systems, and then they leased us to STAT Medevac. That's changed obviously now, standalone program. But yeah, I was an employee of CJ Systems, which I'm sure a lot of the older, like myself, folks are familiar with. That was based in Pittsburgh as well.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I've actually never heard of them, but very cool. Glad to hear that the transition was not too bad for you. And yeah, you're right. Going into, say, a nice advanced aircraft like the 135, you think it was advanced then, now it's really advanced. The new avionic package that Airbus is putting out into the the one, I think it's really the 145, but now they actually have their new aircraft that's also kind of be the hybrid, the 140, between kind of the 135 and the 145. Pretty incredible.
Absolutely.
And, I think really helpful, for that single pilot environment, taking off that workload. And I think things like that will increase safety. I think that sometimes too many avionics, or too nice of avionics, can cause a lot of head down flying and maybe distraction. But I think when they're getting so good at making them, lack of better term, so ergonomic to use, right? It's like such a functionality of just flying the aircraft that it all kind of works. So, I think that the avionics will play a role in decreasing incidents, accidents, and everything in between.
I think it definitely helps. I mean, I always say one of the other challenges I had was, obviously, your primary aircraft may not always be available. And so when you get put into a backup aircraft that you may not be as familiar with, was tough, right? In the Navy, we always had the same, type of aircraft. Every aircraft was exactly the same. And so when, you get put into your backup aircraft, we had a BK-117 and a Twin Star, it might be like, well, shoot, man, I haven't flown that for 2 months.
Yeah, I know I started.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's uncomfortable. I don't like that feeling.
That was very uncomfortable for me. I'm like, this is crazy, and every aircraft was a little bit different, different GPS or different avionics package or instrumentation. So that certainly, I mean, there were sometimes I would call dispatch, say, hey, you got to give me about 30 minutes to get familiar, start it up, fly it in the pattern, and then come back, take me out of service for about 30 minutes. And I will.
One of my most kind of like silly air medical stories that has nothing to do with actually flying air medical. I worked for Air Evac, and Air Evac at that time, I don't know what they have now. I think it's the same. Maybe they've added some other aircraft, but they flew the Long Ranger, which was a unique platform for air medical, and then they flew the 407. And the way that they do the training is that everyone goes to initial, and you do all your initial training in the 206. So you go to Missouri, you do all your 206 training. It's great training. I loved the training that I got at Air Evac. Really a standout company. And I said that before on the show. They were a good company to work for. But I was actually going to a 407 base, and that was kind of by design. I was like, man, Nothing against the Long Ranger. Love the Long Ranger, but I want to fly a 407. That was like what I was excited about. And so after the 206 experience, you go to, I think we went to Carrizo Springs, Texas, which is kind of near the border of Texas there. We did a 407 transition over a few days. And then you go to your base. And so I get to my base. I'm in Del Rio. And I'm getting acquainted with air medical, and as you know, it's a different, there's a lot going on, right? You're filling out your Baldwin before you fly, and you're doing this and you're doing that, and you're calling your operation control center, and you're doing this. There's just a lot going on. So that first couple months is just all about getting your head straight. And then just when I was feeling pretty good about myself, I show up to work one day, and the night pilot's like, "Oh, you got to take the 407 up to the I forget what they call it. It's not an MRO, obviously, but some type of outpost where they're doing maintenance in that region." Yeah, the 407 is going down for maintenance. You're going to pick up a 206. And I'm like, oh. And, for our listeners, starting the 206 is the worst part. If you're not flying the 206 all the time, it's a modulated start, meaning that, you're pressing a button to get the sequence going. And then, you hit a certain NG, and then you just kind of crack that throttle. And then you're actually kind of controlling that TOT during that start. And I did it a ton, but it had been, I don't know, 3 or 4 months since I had done it. And so we get to this or this outpost, and it was kind of a poo-poo show, really, because there's all these checklists. No one knew what they're doing. How do you drop one aircraft off and then switch all your gear into this? I was the wrong guy for the job. I remember being frustrated. And then I had to fly to this 206, and I was not excited for that. And luckily I started it, didn't fry the engine. That was good. Flew home in the dark. It was the darkest I've ever, when I took my NVGs off, it was like if I was just covering my eye. It was so dark between, we're just in the middle of nowhere, Texas, but it's just a funny story that I think about sometimes, of just that stress of getting into a different aircraft that you're unfamiliar with. And, by and large, Air Evac did a good job. I think they forced us to go and fly the 206 every once in a while to kind of maintain that currency. But yeah, totally sympathize on that. So with your career in mind, is there a specific moment where there was kind of a light bulb of like, hey, I'm really into this idea of being, say, a safety officer in the military, or did it just kind of, happen where they were like, hey, you're going to be the safety officer, and then you kind of were told what to do, and then you just ended up just loving it and then continuing that? How did the whole safety thing happen?
Thank you to our sponsor, Vertical Aviation International. This March, you need to be at Verticon, the largest vertical aviation trade show and conference in the world. With over 15,000 attendees and all the major OEMs and suppliers, it's the place to be. Register today and save. Early bird prices end January 16th. Go to verticon.org.
Yeah, so I think the majority of people that are in some type of safety role is, you're voluntold, right? And you're like, you weren't quick enough to put your finger on the nose, and you got selected, and that happened to me. Like, hey, you're going to be the NATOPS guy, or you're going to be the SAR guy, and you're like, oh, it's kind of like in the Navy. It was always regrettable if you got tagged as a legal officer, because it just was not an enjoyable job and not rewarding at all. So I kind of felt safety wasn't as bad as that, right? So I'm like, okay, I'll do that. I'll do safety as long as you don't make me legal officer. And so at first it was like, oh, I got to do this, okay. And it was really more compliance focused, right? Is everyone following the standards and the procedures and all that kind of stuff? And going back to previously, we were kind of saying that stigma, right? I think that's the reason why there was a stigma, because you were the compliance officer, so to speak. That's not fun, right? Because you're the bad guy, and you're identifying people that aren't doing it the right way. And I think when it shifted for me was when in the Navy, and probably when I was flying air medical, and when people would approach you and ask for help, right, and say, hey, I'm uncomfortable with this, or I think we really need that, and relied on you to kind of be that advocate. and help facilitate that kind of change. And I think that's when I kind of said, hey, this other people that are dependent on me to help them, whether it's feel safer or actually be safer. I think that's where I kind of finally said, hey, this is kind of cool, right? I'm in some ways helping somebody else. I mean, of course, I'm helping myself, with implementing safety improvements, but I'm also helping others. And ultimately, you're helping the program or operation, no matter where you're at. And I think that's a good thing, right? And so I think that stigma certainly initially was tough. And I remember when I worked at Sikorsky, working in the production hangar, I would walk down and you would start seeing people taking their safety glasses and putting them down their eyes and start walking around like, oh, here comes Chris, he's going to ding us for not having our.
It's like when you're a cop, man.
Yeah.
My buddy was a cop. He's like, man, everyone drives so good when they see me.
I hated that. I'm like, I don't want to be that guy. I want them to want to wear them, and when they need them, right? And so I think that's how it changed for me is, when people would come up to me and ask for help, and I felt that was important, right?
So how do you transition things that seem as simple as, say, someone working on the floor understanding the importance of wearing safety goggles? How do you approach? Because I think that's a big thing, right? Like when we think about aviation safety, it's not just the safety of the aircraft, right? It's being safe in the hangar, right? It's being safe around aircraft that may or may be either running or static or whatever it might be. And I can imagine in a big production facility, even if it's a production facility that has nothing to do with aviation, there's probably huge safety practices and protocols. And some make a lot of sense, don't walk into a running tail rotor. And maybe some maybe some people are like, oh, I got to wear the stupid mask again, or I got to wear these goggles. How do you approach that? The things that are a little less like hardcore,
right?
And really make people believe like, hey, this is actually for your best benefit. Well,
in that example I gave you at Sikorsky, you started to look at, well, why are we wearing safety glasses to begin with, right? It's eye protection, of course, right? But like if someone's working on an aircraft, just turning a wrench, what truly is the risk exposure for an eye injury in that situation, right? It's pretty minimal, or not at all. But a guy or an individual, working over on a grinder, what's the risk exposure there? Well, it's significantly high. And so, I think the practicality of safety is important, right? When to use it and when to not be so over the top, right? And so again, we got to a point at Sikorsky like, well, hey, if there's really no, you've worn eye protection, they steam up on a hot day, you're sweating, you fog, it's like, oh man, these things are actually making it worse for me. I can't, especially if you're working on top of the aircraft on a work scene or something.
Sure.
And so it got to the point where like, all right, hey, let's look at the areas that truly are an eye risk exposure, right? And where it is, yeah, we got to mandate that. There's no give on that. But when other areas away from, flying particles or something that could injure your eye, well, yeah, you don't have to wear it, right? And so I think that's the key is, it's always a knee-jerk reaction when something negative happens. It's like, oh, do this, do that.
Sure.
Personal protective equipment, PPE, when you look at the hierarchy of controls, that's the least effective. It's at the bottom of that triangle. And it's a good one. It can be a good one, but it also can be a burden too. And so you've got to be careful when you implement safety risk control, safety mitigations. What's the practicality of it? Is it achievable? Are people going to comply with it? And is it effective? And so I think that's the key is like, don't go overboard when we implement risk control or mitigation. Let's look at how it can really help. And if it doesn't help, let's look at something else, right? And so in that case, the eye protection was a great one because then they're like, oh, okay, Chris has got our back. We're trying to be practical and help.
Yeah, it's like it's a bit of a win for the guys. Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing with safety, like the pendulum sometimes can swing a little far, right? And then you have to kind of hone that back in. And I like that stance. I like that practical stance of that. But it is hard, right? Because companies have to also be really cognizant of, yeah, you want to be safe because you don't want people to get hurt. But then there's also all these just, whether it's OSHA and all these other governing bodies, and then of course all the liability. We're fairly quick to sue here in the United States, so you have to be really careful. And so I think it's okay to be overly cautious, but yeah, sometimes it does seem like, we put more hurdles up. But I think that's an interesting example. I want to start to kind of transition into tops here. Before we run out of time. It always happens when you're having a good conversation, and then you look at the time and you say, "Oh," and I don't want to rush that conversation. So I've definitely familiar with tops. It was Terry Palmer that introduced you and I, and she had mentioned tops, and I knew right away what it was. I worked for a tour company. I don't think that they were members of tops. I don't think, but I'm familiar with it, and I'm excited to learn about it. And so I guess just let's start from the basic question: what is TOPS?
Yeah, so the Tour Operator Program of Safety, right? It's a set of standards that were created and continue to develop and change to help improve safety in originally the helicopter air tour industry, right? And so Elling and others' visions was that we want to improve safety for our customers and for our pilots and for our aircraft and our people. And so how do we do that? And so they started to look at what are the FAA requirements that we have? Okay, well, they're pretty, minimal, right? They're there for a good reason, of course, but they're, not consistent throughout the industry, right? Whether you're a Part 135 air tour operator or maybe a Part 91, 147 letter of authorization holder, much different, right? And so, they decided, hey, we wanted to have these set of standards to help promote safety. And then the other key part was to collaborate among each company, right? And provide benchmarking and best practices that others could benefit from, right? And so even though they may have been competitors from an air tour perspective, they didn't compete when it came down to how to enhance safety, which I think was remarkable, back in the day. Certainly others have done that as well. And so that's what the program of safety standards put in place, whether it was certain types of equipment on the aircraft to enhance safety or even enhance survivability, whether it was training for pilots or training for mechanics, training for admin or line staff, things like that to again improve the performance and then actually enhance the experience of the guests going out on air tours. Because quite honestly, the general public has no idea that there's a difference between getting on a United Airlines or Delta or Southwest or whoever and getting into an air tour helicopter or even a charter aircraft for that matter. And there is a significant difference. And so TOPS and the members of TOPS know that, and so they really want to do their best to enhance that. Is it perfect? By no means. Have operators that are members of TOPS have accidents? Yes, they have, and any accident is unfortunate. But the more you can be proactive regarding safety and risk management, the more likely a more positive outcome will be generated, and that was the goal of TOPS.
So from say 0 to full TOPS accreditation, what does that look like for an operator?
Yeah, so if there's an operator that is interested in TOPS, we begin that conversation with providing them with the standards and the missions and the goal of TOPS and wanting to make sure that they're aligned with that goal and mission, and then looking at how kind of a gap analysis, like, hey, where are you at right now as it aligns with the top standards, and then begin to work with them to bring them up to that level, and then we'll do an audit to validate that conformance, and then once that's in place, then they become a member. And so for some members, it's not as difficult, but for others, it can be challenging, especially for those smaller Part 91, 147 operators. one of the requirements of TOPS is you have a 135 certificate. And so guess what? I guess that eliminates those operators unless eventually they transition to that 135 certificate, which we all know is not an easy process and doesn't happen quick. And so unfortunately, TOPS was kind of being exclusive, and that was unfortunate. And so over the last 5 years or so, we've recognized that exclusivity and are now in the process of changing that, because again, no, it doesn't matter if it's a 135 certificate holder or a 91-147 LOA holder. If there's a air tour sightseeing accident, it impacts everybody. And so we had to kind of
100%.
mind shift, right? Change, which we all know is never easy. And so now we're beginning a process where we'll keep the same standards that we have, but we're also, more importantly, going to be focused on that risk management side, right? What do and we all know that they have to comply with SMS pretty soon here, 2027, May 28th is that deadline for letter of compliance for those 91-147 LOA holders. So that's a hard.
Yeah.
I mean, they're small. Sometimes one aircraft, just the owner. That's going to be a hard change to make. And so we're trying to help focus on what are you doing to identify the hazard? What are you doing to mitigate it? And what are you doing to make sure that it's working, right? And so kind of those ideals of SMS. And SMS has been a requirement for TOPS. And, now we're really trying to be more inclusive of all air tour operators, even fixed wing. Now we're really trying to work with these fixed wing operators that fly tourists and for sightseeing, and I think that's equally as important as those operators flying helicopters. And so,
yeah, it's interesting. I 147 is very near and dear to me, and I'm glad to hear that there's a transition for you guys. In fact, not that I really get into like online arguments often. But recently was in a LinkedIn conversation, very polite, lesson to our listeners. Don't be an idiot on social media, but if you want to share your opinion, do it politely and respectfully, and you can have some really good conversation. And in fact, this turned into a really good conversation, but this individual made a statement essentially like this was after that helicopter crash in New York, where it was really a bad crash, right? The rotor came off, the whole transmission separated. I mean, very ugly. And, there's all this big, like, Part 91 tours are dangerous. 91-147 operators are dangerous. And, I would never let my friends fly in a 147. And I'm thinking, well, hey, now, I owned and operated a small tour business out of Fredericksburg, Texas with an R44. I did it under a 91-147 LOA because I wasn't going to wait the 24 months that it took to do a 135 certificate. And it wasn't I didn't need it. I was flying nonstop commercial air tours within 25, statute miles or nautical miles, whatever miles it is. But, and I did it very respectfully. We did all the OEM recommended maintenance. So we were following all the Robinson maintenance manual requirements. We were doing all the safety briefings. I mean, I ran a legitimate tour operation. I then went to a big tour operator, and there's times where I was like, man, I feel like my little one-man safety culture is much better than this company, and they're a big 135. And so, I think it's important. I think that the 147 operators probably need TOPS more than anyone, because it's like this, there's just a lot that you can do to enhance safety. And I think that a lot of small operators are too concerned, it's going to cost too much money or this or that. But, it's really worth spending that extra money on doing safety right, because,
absolutely.
Picking up the pieces is a lot more expensive. And so, glad to hear that you're transitioning to help support the smaller operations, because I think it's important. And I don't think that there's necessarily a safety standard difference all the time. I think it's easy to say, oh, you're a 135 operator, you're awesome. Well, I know plenty of 135 operators that I'm not flying with, right? I know the back end story, right? And so I'm like, it's not necessarily true. It's not always the correct thing. And I'm guessing that there's some 91-147 operators that are shit, right? And that don't do it right. But, by and large, there's a lot of good 147. So I'm happy to hear that. To our listeners out there, the 91 147 LOA is just a little bit of an easier way to be able to start doing revenue tours, sooner than later, and waiting on, say, a 135 certificate or building a 135.
Thank you to our sponsor, HeliLadder. Enhance your fall protection and maintenance efficiency with HeliLadder, the industry standard of ladder workstands. The iconic orange MX-5 system is fully modular and compatible with countless aircraft models for any type of operation, making you money by preventing accidents and reducing maintenance errors. For a free quote and special discounts, visit heliladder.com. Focus on your work, not your balance.
I would say in some ways we need those 91 147 operators, right? Because, flight time requirements are different, right? And so, those young aspiring pilots that want to fly somewhere else one day, right? Being a flight instructor is a very rewarding opportunity, and you build time with that. But that's one small segment of our entire industry, and so we need other pathways, if you will, to help get pilots more experience, even mechanics, right? Working on small aircraft, eventually bigger aircraft. Where do we do that? Well, one methodology is the 147 sightseeing, right? And so, lower flight time requirements, different aircraft, smaller aircraft. And so, when we talk about, the FAA Part 5 SMS requirements, they're scalable, right? Well, that's easier said than done. And so trying to make it risk management scalable for small operators is really hard. Like you said, it costs money. It does, or more importantly, it takes time. And, a lot of those smaller operators, they're maybe they're flying the aircraft. Maybe they're also working on the aircraft. They're doing the books at night, all these things. They don't have a lot of time. And so if we can help them, if we can scale that risk management and help them, already identify hazards and how to mitigate them and how to monitor that, then that's a huge win, because now we need those folks to build experience in a smaller operation so that they can go on to maybe a bigger tour operator, or maybe go on to air medical or some utility type of work. In some ways, people criticize the FAA for allowing them to have that 147 LOA, but in some ways we needed that because we've got to have opportunity for folks to get that experience and build that confidence.
Well, and I think the important thing for, and I'm sure you recognize this, but I feel like this is now an opportunity to capture these 147 owners and operators before they do something stupid like buying a plug and play SMS system, right? Just to check a box. That's a big concern that I have, is that I've talked to too many owners, operators that are just getting this, oh yeah, I got SMS, I bought it on Amazon, and to me, that's not SMS. I was very fortunate because when I was at Hillsborough Aviation, Hillsborough was kind of on the forefront for flight schools of developing an in-house SMS, and it was robust to say the least, and it still is to this day. So for me, I went out to the industry with like this fairly strong knowledge of SMS. And that, I think that really was important for me, right? Because then I could recognize when I was at a company that didn't necessarily implement SMS like I knew it should be. And so I feel like these small operators have a real opportunity now to actually build a legitimate SMS with maybe the help of TOPS or other avenues, whatever it may be. So not only are they going to then create safer operations for themselves, but then you're going to start creating safer pilots, safer maintainers, guys and gals that are familiar with SMS. They start understanding what the SMS process looks like. What is just culture? What does that all feel like? And what should it be like? And so I think it's a great place to start. So I think we tangent a little bit into the 147 world, but I'm happy to hear that that's a direction that you guys are pushing.
I think it's important, right? Because you did mention, there are good operators and bad operators, and I don't think anyone intends to be a bad operator. They just find themselves there at some point because of the culture, or even more importantly, the accountability, right? And so when you look at the FARs, when you look at the top standards or other standards that are out there, that's a foundational level, right? We're trying to create a foundation from which to comply, conform, and then do better. And so the culture, I think, in many ways is important, right? When you look at SMS, you look at the Part 5 requirements, it's overwhelming for any operator, for that matter. But I think the key ingredients are create accountability, right? What is that expectation? When you show up at the door for that first time as a new job, as the owner, as that new person coming in, where's that expectation? What is the accountability? And your point earlier, you're fortunate to go to a place that has something, SMS or risk management in place. That's a great foundation for you to go elsewhere. And you can recognize, even in the interview process, I always tell people, if you're the pilot or mechanic, ask the owner or whoever's interviewing, what do they do for SMS? And if you get the deer in the headlights, you may not want to work there. And maybe that's a little, exaggerated, but nonetheless, hey,
there is some truth. There's some truth to that, though. There really is, because I've worked at both, right? And it's funny, one of the places I worked had horrible safety, in my opinion, horrible SMS. They had it, but it was not good. But they're very safe operation, right? It was an interesting dynamic because their overall safety and their maintenance standards were high, but everything else, SMS wise, was not good. And it was difficult, right? I always actually kind of felt like I was on the razor's edge there, because for them, their response to safety was like, oh, if you do something, you're fired, right? That was just like the response. And to me, like, that's a negative way to lead in aviation, because then, people then start to just not disclose things, right? They're too afraid. You're a human, you got to pay your bills, and oh, you did something a little off kilt, and okay, if I don't say anything, well, then I don't get fired, probably be okay. You can justify, even good people can justify quite quickly, why not to do that. And so, I've seen both, and I've been a part of both. GMR, when I worked, or excuse me, Air Evac, they weren't owned by GMR at that time, actually. So I can't speak to GMR, but Air Evac Life Team, when I worked there, made great SMS. They really had a robust program. It made sense. It was easy to use. It was a neat part to be around. Are you able to talk about who your top members are?
Yeah. We have Papillon is one of our operators. Blue Hawaiian, another one of our operators. Temsco Helicopters, Coastal Helicopters, and North Star Helicopters are members right now. Our newest member joining is Heli New York. They just went through the process, the audit, and they're excited to be a part of it now. And we've got some smaller operators out there that are wanting to be, these 147. Panhandle Helicopters is one of those. Their owner J.R. Hott's been really interested in how small operator can be part of this. And I think the key has been these relationships that we've been building. Unfortunately for years, there was this idea that TOPS is just a good old boy network, and was exclusive. And unfortunately, maybe there was some truth to that. But the goal ultimately is to help everybody. And so that's one reason why we're trying to transition to this kind of new format, if you will, to embrace risk management, right? And really help folks understand, how do we create accountability? How do we identify those hazards? How do we control or mitigate those hazards? And how do we monitor the performance of those controls, but also the culture? I think culture is one of the key areas you've already identified in attitudes and engagement and decision making. All of that has a huge impact on performance. And so create that foundation, right? For risk management, but more importantly, how do we get people to remain engaged, to want to be compliant and follow the rules, but also to help identify gaps and identify shortcomings and know that could be a risk, and how do we improve it? And then the leadership, the ownership, being embracing them. Like, yep, absolutely. Let's fix this, and that's the hard part, is people are the hard part. Our behaviors and values are all different. And that's wonderful because we need that diversity, I think, to be successful, but it also is hard to manage. And that's a challenge for our industry as a whole is we have a lot of diversity, not only in the people, you know, and other, you know, organizations have that, but the diversity in our operations, right? When you work for a helicopter operator, you might go do a tour that day, but then tomorrow you're going to, you know, maybe do a sling load, or maybe you're going to do something else, right? And which is awesome. So going back to, you know, being that multi-platform helicopter operator in the Navy, I love that diversity, but that introduces a lot of more risk exposure that general public doesn't see that when they get on an airline that's heavily controlled and maintained from point A to point B. You know, we don't have that, and that's the hard part.
Yeah, no, it's very challenging, but it's neat and good that there's, you know, organizations like TOPS that can help owners, operators, both small and big, do things to a higher level. You know, and I think that's important. I think that's at the end of the day, I think that we should all be holding ourselves a little bit to a higher level and standard. You know, whether we're working on helicopters or flying helicopters. So yeah, really neat. Chris, I can't believe it. We're already at our time, man. It's been a great conversation. You have an impressive resume, and a really cool story. And, you know, I like how life meanders sometimes. It seems like, you know, you went to the Navy to fly jets. You ended up flying helicopters. In that experience, you get voluntold to go do safety stuff. And now here you are having, you know, a secondary post-career out of the military, not only as a pilot, but someone who's highly invested in driving safety and making our industry hopefully a safer place. So really kind of neat. And I think that there's a lesson there too, right? So if you're listening to the podcast and you think that you have it all figured out, this is what you're going to do and this is your path, have some flexibility, right?
Absolutely.
Enjoy the ride a little bit, because you never know when someone's going to volunteer you to do something that may end up becoming your life work. Not always the case, but it sometimes happens. The path for my life looks very different than I actually ever thought. And I couldn't be more grateful for that. But you have to be flexible and allow that. So neat story altogether. Neat guy, Chris. Really, seriously, really appreciate that. Very smart son, too. He goes to the University of Oregon. I'm an avid Oregon Duck fan. Big weekend coming up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Little house divided situation. How are you guys going to navigate that? Is there any betting or wagering happening?
We'll probably do a small bet, but ultimately I end up paying, you know, whatever he owes anyway. So it'll be bragging rights for the year.
Yeah, Thanksgiving bragging rights, which is important. So yeah, that's really neat. University of Oregon's awesome school, Eugene, great area. What part of Colorado are you in?
So I live on the northwest side of Denver in Boulder, Colorado.
Cool. Yeah, been there. Very nice place. Colorado's fun. Are you a skier?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I enjoy that, getting out there in the wintertime. Yeah, I don't do it as much as I used to, but it's a lot of fun.
Nice. Yeah, I love skiing. I do it all the time on the volunteer patrol here at Mount Bachelor. In fact, I got some new sticks delivered yesterday. I'm going to do like a little, I've never toured before, right? I've never done like the ski touring. And so I got kind of a hybrid. I got the Solomon QST Echoes, like a hybrid ski 106 with a shift binding where you can really alpine hard, but you can also then, you know, tour uphill with it. So I'm excited to do a little touring this year, a little uphill skiing.
Good.
Got to lose some weight.
It's a good workout.
Yeah, absolutely. To our listeners, guys, thanks so much for checking out the Helicopter Podcast. If you are getting into the industry, then you do have a little bit of a responsibility, a big responsibility actually, to be a part of the solution when it comes to safety. And so, you know, I hope when you hear episodes like this, you don't just tune out of like, safety. Safety is so important, I'm telling you. And being a part of an operation that has a robust SMS program that enables pilots to make good decisions. It enables pilots not to be fearful of losing their job if they happen to make a mistake, learning between like what's a systemic problem versus, you know, kind of a one-time thing, and just that whole SMS process. And And so it might not mean a lot to you now as you get into your career, but as you work further into it, hold yourself and hold your employer to a high standard. It's not worth dying. It's really not. So you do have that opportunity to go out and choose who you work for, choose who you fly for. And I would be picky. I think an interview is a two-way street. Oftentimes we look at it as a one-way, and I just don't think that's the case at all. So I think that you're worth more, and I hope you recognize that, and you can actually play a big part in safety. To MHM Publishing, thank you so much for the Vertical HeliCAST platform and making this podcast possible. And of course, to all of our sponsors who are doing awesome, cool things, building cool helicopters, doing it all. We couldn't do it without you. And to our listeners, we appreciate you. Chris, thank you again for coming on the Helicopter Podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Really enjoyed the opportunity.
All right. See you guys. Peace. Please stay tuned for a final word from our sponsors.
Thank you to our sponsor, Robinson Helicopter Company, the choice for unrivaled safety and reliability so you can accomplish any mission with confidence. For more than half a century, Robinson has been at the forefront of the helicopter industry. From the R-22 to the R-66 turbine, Robinson makes helicopters accessible so more people can accomplish more missions. Climb higher. For additional information, visit www.robinsonheli.com.
Thank you to our sponsor, Vertical Aviation International. This March, you need to be at Verticon, the largest vertical aviation trade show and conference in the world. With over 15,000 attendees and all the major OEMs and suppliers, it's the place to be. Register today and save. Early bird prices end January 16th. Go to verticon.org. Thank you to our sponsor, HeliLadder. Enhance your fall protection and maintenance efficiency with HeliLadder, the industry standard of ladder workstands. The iconic orange MX-5 system is fully modular and compatible with countless aircraft models for any type of operation, making you money by preventing accidents and reducing maintenance errors. For a free quote and special discounts, visit heliladder.com. Focus on your work, not your balance.